I never thought the person who promised to stand by me, for better or worse, would choose money over our marriage. But that's exactly what happened when my wife Elaine inherited $500,000 from her aunt and decided our life together wasn't worth keeping. The look in her eyes when she told me to leave our home, a cold detachment I'd never seen before, shattered everything I thought I knew about her. But life has a way of delivering unexpected lessons, and Elaine was about to learn one that no amount of money could fix. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to the beginning to help you understand how we got here. Elaine and I met 7 years ago at a friend's housewarming party in Portland. I was working as a physical therapist at a local clinic, having spent years building my practice and reputation. Elaine was between jobs, again, something that had become a pattern in her life. She'd worked as a real estate assistant, a social media manager, a boutique clerk, and most recently had quit her job at an insurance office after a disagreement with her supervisor. When we met, she captivated me with her quick wit and adventurous spirit. She had this infectious laugh that could light up a room, and dreams bigger than the Oregon sky. I was smitten almost immediately. Within 6 months, we were living together, and a year later, we were married in a simple ceremony at a vineyard just outside the city. The early years were good. At least, that's what I tell myself now. Elaine continued to bounce between jobs, never staying anywhere longer than 8 or 9 months. I didn't mind at first. My practice was doing well, and I believed she just hadn't found her passion yet. I encouraged her to explore, to find what truly made her happy. In retrospect, perhaps I was enabling a pattern that would eventually consume our marriage. 3 years into our relationship, Elaine's Aunt Catherine came to stay with us for a few weeks. Catherine was a remarkable woman, strong, independent, and practical to her core. She'd built a successful interior design business from scratch, working tirelessly even into her 60s. Unlike many in her family, Catherine had never relied on anyone else for financial support. "You've got a good one here, Elaine," Catherine told her one evening while I was preparing dinner. "He's got substance. Don't take that for granted." I pretended not to hear, but I saw Elaine roll her eyes when her aunt wasn't looking. That small gesture should have been a warning sign, but love has a way of blinding us to the obvious. Catherine and I got along well. We shared similar values about work ethic, responsibility, and planning for the future. Elaine would often leave us to our boring conversations, as she called them, preferring to scroll through social media or watch reality TV. Catherine noticed this disconnect, and I could see the concern in her eyes, though she never directly criticized her niece in my presence. "Financial independence isn't just about having money," Catherine once told me when Elaine was out shopping. "It's about having the skills and discipline to manage it properly. Money without wisdom is just potential problems waiting to happen." I nodded, appreciating her insight. What I didn't know then was how prophetic those words would become. After Catherine returned to her home in Seattle, Elaine and I settled back into our routine. I worked at the clinic, sometimes taking on extra patients to build our savings. Elaine started a new job as an administrative assistant at a law firm, but quit within 4 months, claiming the environment was toxic. Instead of looking for another position, she decided to try freelance social media management, which mostly consisted of sporadic gigs that paid little. Our financial discussions became increasingly tense. While I wanted to save for a house and eventually start a family, Elaine preferred to spend on experiences, weekend getaways, expensive restaurants, clothes she rarely wore more than once or twice. When I suggested creating a budget, she accused me of being controlling. "Not everyone wants to live like they're still a broke college student, Nathan," she'd say. "What's the point of working so hard if we can't enjoy life?" I'd remind her that I was the one working consistently, But those conversations never ended well. Still, I loved her. I believed we could work through our differences if we just kept communicating. Then came the news that would change everything. Catherine had passed away suddenly from a heart attack. Elaine was devastated, genuinely so. Despite their differences, she had loved her aunt deeply. We flew to Seattle for the funeral, where Elaine reconnected with family members she hadn't seen in years. The service was beautiful, a true testament to how many lives Catherine had touched. A week after the funeral, Catherine's lawyer contacted Elaine. To our surprise, Catherine had left Elaine $500,000, a sum that seemed almost unimaginable to us at the time. The money came with a letter, which the lawyer handed to Elaine in a sealed envelope. "Your aunt was very specific that you should read this privately," he said. Elaine tucked the letter into her purse without opening it. Later that night I asked about its contents. "Oh, it's just Aunt Catherine being Aunt Catherine," she said dismissively. "Lots of advice about being responsible with the money. You know how she was." I nodded, though something in Elaine's tone made me uneasy. "Are you going to follow her advice?" Elaine shrugged. "It's my inheritance. I'll decide what to do with it." The change in Elaine wasn't immediate. It was gradual, like watching a flower close as evening approaches. She became increasingly secretive about financial matters. When I'd ask about the inheritance, she'd give vague answers or change the subject. She started spending more. Designer clothes, a new laptop, weekend spa retreats with friends I'd never met. When I expressed concern, she'd remind me that it was her money and she deserved to enjoy it. Meanwhile, I continued working at the clinic, taking on extra hours to cover our shared expenses since Elaine had stopped contributing altogether. The disconnect between us grew wider each day. We stopped having dinner together, our conversations became superficial, and our intimacy all but disappeared. I was losing my wife to something I couldn't compete with, the allure of sudden wealth, and the freedom she thought it represented. 3 months after receiving the inheritance, Elaine started talking about buying a vacation property in Bend. When I suggested we should focus on paying off our existing mortgage first, she looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "Why would I put money into this place?" she asked. "It's so ordinary. I want something that reflects who I really am." "And who is that?" I asked, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "I'm not the same person I was before, Nathan. I have options now." Those words echoed in my mind for days afterward. Options. As if our marriage was just one option among many, something to be discarded when a more attractive alternative presented itself. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday evening. I'd had a particularly challenging day at the clinic, a car accident victim whose recovery was going to be long and difficult. All I wanted was to come home, have a quiet dinner with my wife, and decompress. Instead, I walked into our living room to find Elaine sitting on the couch, a cold, determined expression on her face. "We need to talk," she said, not even bothering with a greeting. I sat down across from her, my body tense with apprehension. "What's going on?" "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her voice eerily calm. "This isn't working for me anymore. Us, this house, this life, it's all too small now. I want a divorce." The words hit me like a physical blow. Despite the growing distance between us, despite the warning signs, I had never truly believed she would end our marriage. "Elaine, if this is about money—" "It's not just about the money," she interrupted, though her eyes told a different story. "It's about what the money represents. Freedom, possibilities, a life without limitations." I was the limitation, I realized. Me and my practical approach to life, my belief in building security before luxury, my commitment to the promises we'd made to each other. "We can go to counseling," I suggested, my voice tight with emotion. "We can work through this." Elaine shook her head. There's nothing to work through. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm prepared to be generous. You can keep your retirement accounts and your car. But I want the house. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The house. I was stunned. Elaine, we bought this place together. My name is on the mortgage too. And I'm prepared to buy you out, she said coolly. I've already had it appraised. Your equity share comes to about $75,000. I'll have the money transferred to your account by the end of the week. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The clinical way she discussed dissolving our life together as if it were just another transaction. And where am I supposed to go? She shrugged. You're resourceful. You'll figure it out. Then with a glance at her watch, she added, I need you to pack your essentials tonight. My lawyer suggested a clean break is best. Tonight? I repeated, incredulous. You're kicking me out of my own home tonight? It's not personal, Nathan, she said, though nothing had ever felt more personal in my life. It's just the most practical solution. Practical. The word hung in the air between us, bitter with irony. How many times had she accused me of being too practical, too cautious, too focused on the future instead of living in the moment? And now she was using practicality as a weapon against me. As the reality of the situation sank in, a strange calm settled over me. I looked at this woman, my wife, the person I had planned to grow old with, and realized I no longer recognized her. The Elaine I had fallen in love with was gone, replaced by someone whose values had been corrupted by sudden wealth. Fine, I said quietly, I'll pack a bag. But this isn't over, Elaine. A marriage isn't something you can just discard when something shinier comes along. She didn't respond, already absorbed in her phone, as if I was already in her past. That night I packed what I could into 2 suitcases and a backpack. Clothes, toiletries, a few books, my laptop, 7 years of marriage reduced to what I could carry. As I loaded my car, the rain soaking through my jacket, I glanced back at her house. Through the window I could see Elaine on the phone, laughing, presumably already celebrating her newfound freedom. I drove to a hotel near my clinic, checked in for a week, and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process what had just happened. My marriage was over. My home was gone, all because my wife had inherited money from a woman who, ironically, would have been horrified by how her niece was behaving. As I unpacked my meager belongings, I found a small wooden box I'd grabbed from my nightstand. Inside was a letter from Catherine, given to me during her stay with us. For your eyes only, she had said with a wink, just in case. I had forgotten about it until now. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope, wondering what message from the past awaited me, and whether it might offer any guidance for the uncertain future that now stretched before me. The letter from Catherine was written in her distinctive, elegant handwriting, the blue ink flowing across the cream-colored stationery like water over smooth stones. Dear Nathan, if you're reading this, I suspect things with Elaine have taken a turn. I've watched you both during my stay, and while I would never speak ill of my niece, I've grown concerned about the foundation of your marriage. Elaine has always had a complicated relationship with money, not because she lacked it, but because she never understood its true purpose. You see, my brother, Elaine's father, and his wife always gave Elaine everything she wanted, believing that material comfort was the same as love. They never taught her the value of earning something through her own efforts, or the satisfaction that comes from building something lasting. I love my niece, but I fear what wealth without wisdom might do to her. That's why I've made certain arrangements regarding my estate. While Elaine believes she'll receive an unrestricted inheritance, the reality is more nuanced. The $500,000 she will receive comes with conditions that my lawyer will reveal only when necessary. The full sum has been placed in a special trust with specific release requirements that will either help Elaine grow into the person I know she can be or prevent her from squandering what I've worked my entire life to build. I've also set aside a separate portion for you, Nathan, $100,000 that Elaine knows nothing about. This isn't because I'm playing favorites, but because I've seen your character. You understand that wealth isn't measured solely in dollars, but in how we enrich the lives around us. This money will come to you 3 months after my passing. Use it wisely and perhaps, if circumstances allow, use it to help guide Elaine toward a better understanding of what truly matters. Finally, there's one more thing you should know. The house you and Elaine share has been placed in a special type of trust. While Elaine thinks she can do whatever she wants with it, the truth is that any attempt to remove you from the property without proper cause will trigger a clause that could significantly impact her inheritance. I hope this letter never becomes relevant. I hope my fears are unfounded and that you and Elaine build a beautiful life together. But if that's not to be, know that I saw your worth even if my niece lost sight of it. With respect and affection, Catherine Wilson. I read the letter. Twice, my hands trembling slightly. Catherine had seen what I couldn't or wouldn't see, the fundamental disconnect between Elaine's values and mine. She had witnessed the red flags I had ignored and had quietly put safeguards in place, not just for her money, but for me as well. The revelation left me with mixed emotions. Part of me felt validated. Catherine had recognized my character and deemed it worthy of protection. Another part felt a deep sadness that such protection had been necessary in the first place. Had our marriage always been this fragile? Had Elaine always been capable of such callous disregard for our vows? I carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Whatever was about to unfold, I needed to proceed carefully. This wasn't about revenge or getting even. It was about justice and honoring Catherine's final wishes. The next morning, I called in sick to the clinic, something I rarely did, and contacted Catherine's lawyer, Martin Greenberg. When I mentioned the letter Catherine had given me, he immediately made time for a meeting that afternoon. Greenberg's office was in a converted Victorian house in downtown Portland, the interior a blend of modern functionality and old-world charm, much like Catherine herself had been. He greeted me with a firm handshake, his expression a mix of sympathy and professional detachment. "I wondered when I'd be hearing from you," he said, gesturing for me to take a seat across from his desk. Catherine was quite specific about how events might unfold. "She seems to have predicted everything," I replied, still processing the revelations from her letter. Greenberg nodded, removing his glasses and placing them carefully on the polished mahogany desk. Catherine was remarkably perceptive. She cared deeply for her niece, but harbored no illusions about her character. So the conditions on Elaine's inheritance, they're real? Very much so. He opened a file folder and slid a document across the desk. The $500,000 Elaine believes she has received without restriction is actually held in a carefully structured trust. She has access to the initial $50,000, which she has already withdrawn. The remaining $450,000 is subject to specific conditions. I scanned the document, my eyes widening as I absorbed the details. She has to maintain steady employment for at least 2 years and complete a financial literacy course and contribute to a charitable foundation. Greenberg's expression remained neutral, though I detected a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. Catherine believed that wealth without purpose becomes a burden rather than a blessing. She wanted to ensure her life's work would foster growth, not entitlement. Does Elaine know about any of this? Not yet. The trust was structured so that she would receive the initial sum without restrictions. The conditions are only revealed when she attempts to access the remaining funds or when certain triggering events occur, like trying to force me out. Of our home, I asked, remembering Catherine's letter. Precisely. Greenberg pulled another document from the folder. The deed to your house was quietly transferred into a specialized marital trust 6 months ago, with both your names on it. Catherine arranged it as a gift, which Elaine readily accepted without reading the fine print. The trust stipulates that neither party can force the other from the residence without mutual agreement or legal grounds beyond a simple divorce. I sat back, trying to process everything. So when Elaine told me to leave, she triggered the protective clause. Greenberg confirmed. As of this morning, her access to the remaining inheritance has been frozen pending review by the trustee, which happens to be me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Elaine's attempt to claim everything had potentially cost her most of her inheritance. Yet I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness at how thoroughly money had corrupted what I once thought was love. What about the $100,000 Catherine left for me? Greenberg reached into a drawer and produced another envelope. It's all arranged. The funds will be transferred to an account in your name by the end of the week. Catherine was quite explicit that this gift came with no strings attached. She trusted your judgment completely. As I left Greenberg's office, clutching the paperwork that detailed my rights and Elaine's obligations, I felt oddly hollow. This wasn't a victory. It was the final confirmation that my marriage had been built on shakier ground than I'd ever realized. I checked into a different hotel, not ready to confront Elaine with what I'd learned. I needed time to think, to decide how to proceed in a way that honored Catherine's intentions without being driven by bitterness or revenge. That evening, as I sat in the hotel restaurant pushing pasta around my plate without much appetite, my phone rang. Elaine's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Nathan. Her voice was different from the cold, dismissive tone she'd used the night before. Now it trembled with panic. Something's wrong. I tried to transfer money from the inheritance account to put a deposit on that property in Bend, but it's not working. The bank says the funds are frozen, and there's a notice about the house, something about a trust. I don't understand what's happening. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I think you need to speak with Martin Greenberg, Catherine's lawyer. I already called him, she snapped, frustration bleeding through the panic. He said he can't. Discuss it until tomorrow and that you should be present for the meeting. Me? Why would he want me there? I don't know. Elaine's voice rose, edging toward hysteria. Nathan, I need your help, please. Whatever this is, we can figure it out together. Together. The word hung in the air between us, laden with irony. 24 hours ago, she had made it abundantly clear that together was no longer part of her vocabulary. Elaine, I said quietly, yesterday you told me our marriage was over. You said I was a limitation you needed to be free from. You kicked me out of our home with barely enough time to pack a bag. And now you want my help? I was upset, she said quickly. I wasn't thinking clearly. Look, we can talk about all that. Later, right now, I just need to sort out this situation with the money. The money, not our relationship, not the pain she had caused, not the vows she had broken. The money. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity what Catherine had understood all along. Elaine wasn't just materialistic or impulsive. She fundamentally misunderstood what gave life meaning. To her, relationships, even marriage, were transactional, valuable only as long as they served her immediate desires. I'll meet you at Greenberg's office tomorrow, I said finally. 10 o'clock. Thank you, she breathed, relief evident in her voice. And Nathan, I'm sorry about yesterday, I really am. As I ended the call, I wondered if her apology was genuine or simply another transaction, the price she thought she needed to pay to regain access to the money. Either way, tomorrow would bring revelations that would change the course of both our lives. I slept fitfully that night, dreams filled with Catherine's knowing eyes and Elaine's tearful pleas. By morning, I had reached a decision about how to handle the situation, one that I hoped would honor Catherine's wisdom while giving Elaine a chance to grow into the person her aunt had always believed she could be. Whether she would take that chance was another matter entirely. The next morning, I arrived at Greenberg's office 15 minutes early. I wanted a moment with the lawyer before Elaine arrived, a chance to center myself and clarify my intentions. "You don't owe her anything, you know," Greenberg said as we waited, his voice matter-of-fact. "Legally speaking, Catherine's arrangements protect you completely. You could walk away right now, take your portion of the inheritance, and leave Elaine to deal with the consequences of her actions." I nodded, staring out the window at the rain-slicked streets of Portland. "I know. But this isn't just about legal obligations. Catherine trusted me with something more important than money." Greenberg studied me for a moment, then smiled slightly. "She was right about you." Before I could respond, his assistant buzzed to announce Elaine's arrival. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Elaine looked different than she had just 2 days ago. The cold confidence that had radiated from her as she ordered me from our home was gone, replaced by a nervous energy. Dark circles underlined her eyes, and her typically immaculate appearance showed signs of hasty preparation. She'd traded designer clothes for jeans and a simple sweater, an unconscious return to the woman I'd originally fallen in love with. Her eyes darted between Greenberg and me, uncertainty written across her features. "What's going on? Why is my inheritance frozen?" Greenberg gestured for her to sit. "Ms. Reynolds, your aunt's estate is more complex than initially conveyed. The full inheritance comes with certain stipulations." "Stipulations?" Elaine repeated, her voice rising. "What are you talking about? The money is mine. Catherine left it to me." "Yes and no," Greenberg replied calmly, sliding a document across the desk. "Your aunt left you the opportunity to receive the full inheritance. Whether you actually receive it depends on your actions over the next 2 years. Elaine snatched up the document, her eyes scanning the text frantically. As she read, her face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, anger. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed, slapping the papers down. "I have to work a full-time job for 2 years, take financial management classes, donate to charity. She can't control me from the grave." "She's not trying to control you," I said quietly, speaking for the first time since she'd entered. "She's trying to help you." Elaine turned to me, eyes flashing. "Help me? By holding my inheritance hostage? By—" "Wait." Her expression shifted as she continued reading. "What's this about the house? Some kind of marital property trust?" Greenberg cleared his throat. "6 months ago, your aunt transferred the deed to your home into a specialized trust. Both you and Nathan are equal beneficiaries. The terms specifically prohibit either party from forcing the other to leave without mutual consent or legal grounds, beyond simple divorce proceedings." That's not possible," Elaine stammered. "The house is in both our names, but I paid you to leave. I have the right—" "Actually, you don't," Greenberg interrupted gently. "Furthermore, your attempt to remove Mr. Reynolds from the property has triggered a review clause in the inheritance trust. Until this matter is resolved, the remaining $450,000 will remain frozen." The color drained from Elaine's face as the full implications sank in. Not only could she not force me from our home, but her actions had jeopardized access to the bulk of her inheritance. She turned to me, her expression a mixture of betrayal and desperation. "Did you know about this all this time?" I shook my head. "Not until after you kicked me out. Catherine gave me a letter, but I had forgotten about it until I was packing my things." "A letter," she repeated flatly. "So you've been in on this from the beginning." No, Elaine. I was as surprised as you are now. But Catherine saw something in our relationship that I was too blind to see, that money matters more to you than people. She flinched, as if I'd slapped her. That's not fair, isn't it? I asked quietly. The moment you thought you had financial freedom, you threw away 7 years of marriage. You called me a limitation. You gave me hours to pack my life into 2 suitcases. Elaine looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I made a mistake. I was overwhelmed by the inheritance, by the possibilities. I wasn't thinking clearly. That's just it, Elaine. You were thinking clearly. Perhaps more clearly than you ever have before. The money didn't change you, it revealed you. A heavy silence settled over the office. Outside, rain tapped against the windows, a gentle counterpoint to the tension. In the room, finally, Greenberg spoke. There's one more matter we need to discuss. He produced another document. Mr. Reynolds, this concerns the separate trust Catherine established for you. Elaine's head snapped up. Separate trust? What separate trust? Catherine left Nathan $100,000 of his own, Greenberg explained, with no conditions attached. 100,000? Elaine's voice broke. She left him money too, after everything I did for her. The irony of her statement wasn't lost on any of us. What exactly had Elaine done for her aunt? Visited occasionally, called on birthdays? Catherine had been the giver in their relationship. Not Elaine. Your aunt made her decisions based on her observations and values, Greenberg said diplomatically. She believed in rewarding certain qualities she found admirable. Elaine turned to me, tears welling in her eyes. So what happens? Now you take your money and run? Leave me to jump through hoops for mine? Take the house too? I studied her face, this woman I had loved, had built a life with, had imagined growing old beside. Despite everything, I didn't hate her. If anything, I pitied her. Elaine had always been searching for something money couldn't buy, but she'd never understood that. I'm not going to punish you, Elaine, I said finally. That's not what Catherine wanted, and it's not what I want either. Then what do you want? She asked, vulnerability cracking through her anger. I took a deep breath. I want you to have the chance to become the person Catherine believed you could be, the person I once thought you were. Reaching into my pocket, I withdrew a folded paper. I'd prepared that morning. These are my terms. I'll move back into the house, not as your husband, but as a co-owner. We'll live separately under the same roof until you've met Catherine's conditions for the inheritance. You'd do that? Live with me after everything? Disbelief colored her voice. Not for you, I clarified. For Catherine. She believed in second chances, and I respect her too much to ignore her wishes. I slid the paper across the desk. But I have conditions of my own. Elaine hesitantly took the paper and read through my terms. Her eyes widened slightly as she reached the end. You're asking for a post-nuptial agreement, giving up any claim to my inheritance? I nodded. The money was never what mattered to me, Elaine. If you complete Catherine's requirements and get your inheritance, it's yours, all of it. I don't want a penny. And the house? Once you've fulfilled the conditions, we sell it and split the proceeds equally, as we originally purchased it. Until then, we coexist, cordially, if not happily. Elaine stared at the paper for a long moment, then at me. Why would you do this? After how I treated you, why would you help me get the inheritance? It was a fair question, one I had asked myself repeatedly over the last 24 hours. The answer came from a place deeper than anger or hurt, because Catherine loved you and she believed you could be better than this. She put these conditions in place not to punish you, but to help you grow. And despite everything, I still care. What happens to you? Tears spilled down Elaine's cheeks, real tears, not the calculated displays of emotion she'd sometimes used to get her way in our marriage. I don't deserve your help, she whispered. Maybe not, I agreed, my voice gentle, but firm. But that's the thing about growth, Elaine. It's not about getting what you deserve. It's about learning to deserve what you get. Greenberg, who had been quietly observing our exchange, cleared his throat. Ms. Reynolds, do you accept these terms? Elaine looked down at the papers, then back at me. The entitlement that had hardened. Her features just days ago had softened into something resembling humility. Yes, she said finally, I accept. As we signed the necessary documents, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a quiet certainty that I was honoring Catherine's final wishes. The road ahead would be difficult. Living under the same roof as Elaine while maintaining emotional distance would test us both. But perhaps in the process, we might both learn something about the true nature of wealth and value. As we left Greenberg's office, stepping into the rain-washed streets, Elaine hesitated beside me. I really am sorry, Nathan, she said quietly. Not just because of the money, but because I lost sight of what mattered. I nodded, acknowledging her words without accepting them as an eraser for the pain she'd caused. We all lose our way sometimes. The question is whether we're willing to put in the work to find our path again. We walked to our separate cars in silence, both contemplating the unusual arrangement we'd just agreed to. Not quite married, not quite divorced, bound together by a wisdom from beyond the grave and the possibility of redemption. The real test was just beginning. Moving back into the house that evening was one of the strangest experiences of my life. I used my key, which I had never returned, and stepped into the foyer carrying the same 2 suitcases I'd left with just days before. The house smelled the same, looked the same, but everything had changed. Elaine was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, a glass of wine in her hand. She'd changed into yoga pants and an oversized sweater, comfort clothes. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. I cleared out the guest room, she said awkwardly, and made space in the bathroom upstairs for your things. Thank you, I replied. The politeness between us feeling foreign after years of casual intimacy. I appreciate that. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken words and fresh wounds. I made dinner, she finally offered. Nothing fancy, just pasta. There's enough for 2 if you're hungry. I was about to refuse, to retreat to the guest room and establish the boundaries of our new arrangement, but something in her expression stopped me. Beneath the remorse and embarrassment, I glimpsed genuine loneliness. Sure, I said, I could eat. We ate at opposite ends of the dining table, the distance between us both physical and emotional. The conversation was stilted, limited to logistics. Bathroom. Schedules, grocery shopping, bill payments, the mundane details of 2 lives existing in parallel rather than together. I called about that financial literacy course today, Elaine said abruptly, pushing pasta around her plate. The one from Catherine's Conditions. It starts next week. I nodded, somewhat surprised by her initiative. That's good. What about the job requirement? She sighed, setting down her fork. I have an interview on Friday at Westridge Marketing. It's an entry-level position, nothing glamorous. I'll be starting at the bottom. Everyone has to start somewhere, I said, then immediately regretted the platitude. I wasn't her mentor or life coach. I was her estranged husband, bound to her by a bizarre arrangement neither of us had chosen. That's what Catherine always said. A sad smile flickered across Elaine's face. I never listened to her. I always thought there was a shortcut, a way to skip the hard parts. She looked up at me, her eyes clear and direct for the first time in months. I was wrong about a lot of things. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to fall back into the familiar pattern of reassurance and support. Another part remained cautious, protective of the heart she had so carelessly broken. It's been a long day, I said finally, standing and carrying my plate to the sink. I think I'll turn in early. Elaine nodded, disappointment evident in the slump of her shoulders. Good night, Nathan. As I climbed the stairs to the guest room, That would be my home for the foreseeable future. I wondered if I was making a mistake. Living together while emotionally apart seemed like a recipe for confusion and pain. Yet something in Catherine's letter had suggested this was exactly what she had intended, a chance for Elaine to see, up close, the consequences of valuing money over relationships. The days that followed established a rhythm of careful avoidance and polite interaction. We passed like ships in the night, exchanging brief pleasantries before retreating to our separate spaces. Elaine left early each morning for her new job, returning tired but oddly satisfied. I continued my work at the physical therapy clinic, finding solace in helping others heal while my own wounds remained fresh. The $100,000 Catherine had left me remained untouched in a separate account. Unlike Elaine, I felt no rush to spend or allocate the money. It represented something precious, Catherine's belief in me, and I wanted to honor that by using it thoughtfully. 3 weeks into our strange cohabitation, I arrived home to find Elaine sitting at the dining table, surrounded by papers and an open laptop. She looked up when I entered, her expression a mix of frustration and determination. "The financial literacy course is kicking my butt," she admitted with a rueful smile. "I never realized how little I understood about money." I hung my jacket on the hook by the door, curiosity overriding my usual caution. "What are you working on? A personal budget and 5-year financial plan?" She ran her hands through her hair, a gesture of frustration I remembered from our early days together. "I've never actually made one before. It's embarrassing how bad I am at this." Against my better judgment, I moved closer to the table. "May I?" She hesitated, then nodded, sliding the papers toward me. I scanned her work, noting the obvious errors in calculation and unrealistic projections. "Your expense estimates are low," I said gently. "And you haven't accounted for taxes on the inheritance once you receive it." Elaine groaned, dropping her head into her hands. "See, hopeless. Catherine knew exactly what she was doing with these conditions. I'm exactly the last person who should be trusted with a large sum of money." I pulled out a chair and sat down, surprising myself with the gesture. "You're not hopeless. You just never learned this stuff. No one is born knowing how to manage finances." "You seem to know what you're doing," she countered. "I had to learn it too," I reminded her. "Remember when we first started dating? I was still paying off student loans, living paycheck to paycheck. It took time and discipline to turn things around." Elaine studied me for a moment, then asked hesitantly, Would you mind helping me with this? Just with the calculations, I mean." "The course instructor said we can get help. We just have to do the final work ourselves." It was a small request, innocent on the surface, yet it represented the first step toward a different kind of relationship between us. Not the rekindling of romance, but perhaps the beginning of respect. "Okay," I agreed cautiously. "I can help with the basics." What I had intended to be a brief tutoring session stretched into hours as we worked through the fundamentals of budgeting, compound interest, and investment strategies. Elaine was a quick study when she applied herself, asking insightful questions and taking careful notes. "I can't believe Catherine did all this by herself," she marveled, as we reviewed the growth potential of different investment approaches. Building her business, managing her money, planning for the future, all without anyone's help. She wasn't afraid of hard work, I observed. She understood that anything worthwhile takes time and effort. Elaine's expression turned contemplative. "I've never really built anything lasting. Not a career, not a solid financial foundation." She paused, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Not even our marriage." The raw honesty caught me off guard. This wasn't the entitled woman who had demanded I leave our home. This was someone grappling with difficult truths about herself. "It's not too late to start," I said carefully, maintaining emotional distance despite our physical proximity. "That's the whole point of Catherine's conditions, to give you that chance." She nodded, gathering her papers into a neater stack. I'm starting to understand that now. I just wish—" She trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. Wish what? I prompted. Against my better judgment, Elaine met my gaze directly. I wish I'd understood sooner, before I hurt you, before I threw away something that mattered far more than money. The sincerity in her voice stirred emotions I'd been carefully suppressing. It would have been easier if she'd remained selfish and entitled, easier to maintain the walls I'd built around my heart. It's getting late, I said, standing abruptly. You should finish your assignment tomorrow with a fresh perspective. As I turned to leave, Elaine caught my hand. The unexpected contact sent a jolt through me, and I pulled away reflexively. Thank you, she said, seemingly unfazed by my reaction. Not just for the help tonight, but for giving me this chance at all. You didn't have to do any of this. I nodded, unsure how to respond, and retreated to the safety of the guest room. Alone, I sat on the edge of the bed, troubled by the confusing mix of emotions her gratitude had triggered. I didn't want to care about Elaine's growth or redemption. I didn't want to find myself hoping she would fulfill Catherine's conditions. That path led only to more heartache, yet as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, it became increasingly difficult to ignore the changes in Elaine. The woman who had once shopped impulsively and complained about working now meticulously, tracked her expenses, and spoke with genuine enthusiasm about her job. She had been promoted twice in 4 months, her natural charisma finally channeled into productive work rather than idle social climbing. More significantly, she had begun volunteering at a women's financial empowerment nonprofit on weekends, initially to fulfill Catherine's charitable requirement, but increasingly because she found meaning in helping others avoid the mistakes she had made. One Saturday evening, nearly 6 months into our arrangement, I arrived home from a conference to find an envelope propped against my door. Inside was a check for $75,000, the exact amount Elaine had offered to buy me out of the house, along with a handwritten note. Nathan, this is the money I tried to use to push you out of our home. I was wrong to think I could put a price on the life we built together, wrong to think money could solve everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you'll accept this as a small step toward making things right. Elaine. I sat on my bed, staring at the check for a long time, unsure what to make of this gesture. Was it genuine remorse, or another transaction in Elaine's mind, a payment to clear her conscience? As if sensing my confusion, Catherine's words from her letter echoed in my mind. Use it wisely, and perhaps, if circumstances allow, use it to help guide Elaine toward a better understanding of what truly matters. The question was, what truly mattered now, to Elaine and to me? I didn't cash Elaine's check right away. Instead, I placed it in the wooden box where I kept Catherine's letter, uncertain what to do with this unexpected gesture. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to reject the idea that money could somehow address the wound Elaine had inflicted. Another part recognized that returning the $75,000 represented a significant sacrifice for her, especially given her limited access to the inheritance. 2 days later, as we passed in the kitchen during our morning routines, Elaine broached the subject. "Did you get my note?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral as she poured coffee into a travel mug. "I did," I replied, keeping my tone equally measured. "That's a substantial amount of money, Elaine," she shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "It belongs to you. I never should have tried to use it to push you out." After a pause, she added, "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Nathan. I just needed to make that right." Before I could respond, she grabbed her keys and headed for the door. "I have an early meeting. Don't wait up. I have my financial literacy class after work." As the front door closed behind her, I found myself contemplating the woman Elaine was becoming. The entitled, impulsive person who had demanded a divorce at the first taste of wealth seemed increasingly distant from the focused, accountable woman who now shared my home. That evening, I made a decision. I wrote a check of my own, $75,000 from the inheritance Catherine had left me, and placed it in an envelope with a brief note. Elaine, I appreciate the gesture and what it represents. However, this isn't about money between us anymore. I'm establishing a scholarship fund at Portland Community College in Catherine's name to help adult students seeking financial education. I'm matching your amount as the initial endowment. If you'd like, we could make this a joint effort, not as husband and wife, but as two people honoring Catherine's legacy. Nathan, I left the envelope on the dining table where she would see it. When she returned from her class, then I went to bed, strangely at peace with the decision. The next morning, I found my envelope still on the table, but now it contained both checks, hers and mine, along with a handwritten addition to my note. Yes, let's do this together. This matters more than either of us. This small collaboration marked a turning point in our arrangement. Though we maintained separate lives under one roof, a fragile bridge had formed between us, built not on romantic feelings or obligation, but on shared respect for Catherine's values and vision. Over the next several months, we worked with Portland Community College to establish the Catherine Wilson Memorial Scholarship. The process required multiple meetings, paperwork, and decisions about criteria for recipients. We settled on supporting adult students returning to education after financial setbacks, people who were seeking a second chance, just as Catherine had intended for Elaine. Through this joint project, I began to see a different side of Elaine. She approached the scholarship with genuine passion, researching similar programs and suggesting improvements to our initial framework. Her insights were often surprisingly thoughtful, born from her first-hand experience of financial illiteracy and its consequences. What if we include a mentoring component? She suggested during one of our planning sessions at the dining table. Recipients could be paired with financial professionals who volunteer their time. I've seen how valuable one-on-one guidance can be through my volunteer work. I nodded, impressed by the suggestion. That's actually a great idea. Personal guidance makes a huge difference. I would have saved myself a lot of trouble if I'd had someone to talk sense into me earlier, she said with a self-deprecating smile. Someone besides you and Catherine, I mean. Someone I would have actually listened to. The casual acknowledgement of her past stubbornness surprised me. The Elaine I had married would never have admitted such a fault, let alone joked about it. You're listening now, I observed. That counts for something. She looked up, her expression suddenly serious. Is it too late, though? That's what I keep asking myself. Some mistakes can't be undone. The vulnerability in her voice caught me off guard. We had carefully avoided discussing our marriage, or what remained of it, focusing instead on practical matters and the scholarship fund. This felt dangerously close to reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. Some things can't be undone, I agreed cautiously. But that doesn't mean there isn't a path forward, just not necessarily the same path as before. Elaine nodded, accepting this ambiguous answer without pressing further. She returned her attention to the scholarship paperwork, but something had shifted in the atmosphere between us. An acknowledgement that eventually we would need to address the future of our relationship directly. That conversation came sooner than I expected. 1 year and 2 months into our unusual living arrangement, I arrived home to find Elaine waiting in the living room, an official-looking folder on the coffee table before her. Martin Greenberg called today, she said without preamble. I've officially completed all of Catherine's conditions. The full inheritance will be released next week. I set down my bag, processing this information. That's congratulations. You've worked hard for this. I have, she agreed, a quiet pride in her voice. It wasn't just about the money in the end. I actually enjoy my job now. The promotion to marketing director last month means I'll be earning more than I ever have before. I've noticed, I said, and it was true. Elaine had transformed from someone who drifted between jobs to someone who approached her career with focused determination. The change went beyond resume building. She seemed genuinely fulfilled by meaningful work. According to our agreement, now that the conditions are met, we should sell the house and go our separate ways, she continued, her voice carefully neutral. The moment hung between us, weighted with unspoken questions. Our arrangement had reached its predetermined conclusion. The path forward should have been clear, yet something held me back from simply agreeing. "Is that what you want?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. Elaine looked down at her hands, then back up at me, her expression more open than I'd seen it in years. "I don't know. A year ago, all I wanted was the money and the freedom I thought it would bring. Now," she gestured vaguely around the room, "now I'm not sure." "What changed?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Everything," she said simply. "I changed. My understanding of what matters changed." She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I know I hurt you terribly, Nathan. I know trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. Maybe it can't be repaired at all. But I need you to know that I'm not the same person who asked you to leave that night." I sat down across from her, feeling the weight of this pivotal moment. "I've seen the changes, Elaine. I would have to be blind not to." Hope flickered in her eyes. "Does that mean—" "I don't know what it means," I interrupted gently. "I need time to think about what comes next, for both of us." She nodded, disappointment evident but tempered with understanding. "Of course. Take all the time you need." She stood, gathering the folder. "I'll be staying at Sarah's this weekend. Some space might be good for both of us." After she left, I sat alone in the living room for a long time, contemplating the crossroads before me. The easy path would be to follow our agreement, sell the house, divide the proceeds, and move on with our separate lives. Elaine had her inheritance now, and I had my portion from Catherine, along with my thriving practice. We could walk away with a civil, if not friendly, ending to our story, but something nagged at me. Something Catherine had written in her letter. "I hope this letter never becomes relevant. I hope my fears are unfounded and that you and Elaine build a beautiful life together." Catherine hadn't intended her arrangements as merely a punishment for Elaine or protection for me. She had hoped for redemption, for growth that might save what was valuable in our relationship. Had that happened? Had Elaine truly changed, or was I seeing what I wanted to see? And even if she had changed, was it enough to rebuild what had been so thoroughly broken? I pulled out my phone and dialed Martin Greenberg's number. If anyone could offer perspective on this situation, it would be the man who had helped Catherine craft her final wishes. "Nathan," he greeted me warmly. "I was about to call you. I assume Elaine has shared the news." "She has," I confirmed. "That's actually why I'm calling. I could use some advice." Greenberg chuckled softly. "Catherine suspected you might reach this crossroads. She left something else for you, something to be given only when Elaine met all the conditions and you specifically asked for guidance." My heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "Not something I can share over the phone," he replied. "Can you come to my office tomorrow morning, say 9 o'clock? As I agreed to the meeting, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and trepidation. Just when I thought Catherine's influence had reached its conclusion, she had one final message to deliver, one that might well determine the course of my future, and perhaps Elaine's as well. That night, I slept fitfully, my dreams filled with Catherine's knowing smile and fragments of the life Elaine and I had once shared. By morning, I was no closer to clarity, but I knew one thing with certainty. Whatever decision I made needed to honor not just Catherine's wishes, but my own values and needs as well. The future, with all its uncertainty, was waiting for me in Martin Greenberg's office. Greenberg's office looked exactly as it had on that pivotal day over a year ago when Elaine and I had sat across from him, learning the truth about Catherine's will. The same elegant furnishings, the same soft light filtering through Venetian blinds, the same sense that life-altering revelations were about to unfold. The lawyer greeted me with a warm handshake, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. "I've been expecting this visit for some time," he said, settling into his leather chair. Catherine was remarkably perceptive about how events might unfold. She seemed to anticipate everything, I agreed, a mixture of admiration and unease in my voice. "Sometimes I wonder if she orchestrated all of this from the beginning." Greenberg smiled thoughtfully. "Not orchestrated, perhaps, but she certainly created a framework for possibilities. Catherine understood human nature, both its flaws and its capacity for growth." He opened a drawer and removed a small wooden box, similar to the one Catherine had given me years ago. This one was crafted from rich walnut with delicate inlays around the edges. He placed it carefully on the desk between us. "Catherine left explicit instructions that this was to be given to you only after Elaine had fulfilled all conditions of the inheritance, and only if you specifically sought guidance about the future." I stared at the box, suddenly hesitant. Whatever message Catherine had left felt momentous, final, a responsibility as much as a gift. "What's in it?" I asked. "I don't know," Greenberg admitted. "Catherine sealed it herself. I was instructed not to open it, only to ensure it reached you at the right moment." He pushed the box toward me. "That moment is now." With careful hands, I lifted the hinged lid. Inside lay a cream-colored envelope and a small velvet pouch. I removed the envelope first, breaking the wax seal that bore Catherine's initials. The letter inside was written in the same elegant hand as the first one she had left me, the blue ink flowing gracefully across the page. "My dear Nathan, if you're reading this, it means several things have come to pass. Elaine has fulfilled the conditions I set forth, demonstrating a capacity for growth I always hoped she possessed. You have honored my wishes, despite the personal cost. And now you stand at a crossroads, uncertain which path to choose. The easy answer would be to walk away. Elaine hurt you deeply, betrayed your trust in the most fundamental way. No one would blame you for choosing to move forward alone, taking the lessons of this chapter without carrying its burdens. But I suspect you're considering a more difficult path, one that acknowledges the possibility of genuine change and the value of shared history. This is the choice that requires true courage. When I was 32, my husband Michael made a terrible mistake that nearly destroyed our marriage. The details aren't important now, but the wound felt unsurvivable at the time. I came within a breath of walking away forever. What stopped me wasn't blind forgiveness or fear of being alone. It was the recognition that people can change in authentic, lasting ways when confronted with the consequences of their actions. Michael and I rebuilt our life together, one careful day at a time. It wasn't easy, and the new relationship wasn't identical to the old one. In many ways, it was stronger, tempered by fire and conscious choice rather than initial passion. We had 40 more beautiful years together before his passing. Years I would have lost had I chosen the simpler path. I share this not to prescribe your choice, but to expand your perspective. Renewal is possible, though never guaranteed. The question isn't whether Elaine deserves a second chance. It's whether the person she has become is someone you choose to build a life with, eyes wide open to both possibility and risk. In the velvet pouch, you'll find 2 items that symbolize this choice. My grandmother's ring, which Michael gave me when we renewed our vows after our near dissolution, and a single key, one I had made but never used, to a cabin on Whidbey Island I purchased shortly before my diagnosis. The property is now yours, regardless of what you decide about Elaine. It can be a place of new beginnings or peaceful solitude. That choice, like all others, is yours to make. Whatever you decide, know this: love is not a feeling but a practice, a daily choice to see the best in another person while acknowledging their humanity. True forgiveness, should you choose to offer it, is not forgetting harm, but choosing to build something new despite it. I have cherished watching you grow into the person you are. Trust that wisdom, whatever path it guides you toward. With eternal affection, Catherine, I set the letter down, emotions swirling through me like leaves caught in an autumn wind. Then I reached for the velvet pouch, loosening its drawstring to reveal its contents. The ring was vintage platinum, an elegant diamond surrounded by sapphires that caught the morning light streaming through the office window. The key was newer, brass, with a small tag labeled Whidbey Shores. She never mentioned a property on Whidbey Island, I said quietly, more to myself than to Greenberg. The lawyer nodded. Catherine kept some matters private, even from me. The cabin was purchased 3 months before her passing through a separate attorney. The deed was transferred to a trust in your name immediately upon her death. A fresh start, I murmured, running my thumb over the key's serrated edge. Or a continuation, Greenberg suggested gently. Catherine believed in building on foundations, rather than discarding them entirely. I carefully returned the items to the pouch, and both the pouch and letter to the wooden box. "Thank you for keeping this safe," I said, rising from my chair, "and for everything else." "May I ask what you're thinking?" Greenberg inquired, his expression kind but neutral. I considered the question, searching for words to match my tangled thoughts. "I'm thinking that Catherine was right about many things, but this decision has to be mine, based not on her experience, but on my own judgment." Greenberg nodded approvingly. That's precisely what she would have wanted. As I left his office, the wooden box tucked securely under my arm, I felt a peculiar lightness. Not because I had arrived at a decision, but because I understood that whatever choice I made would be fully mine, informed by Catherine's wisdom, but not directed by it. I drove to a small park overlooking the Willamette River, finding a bench where I could sit undisturbed. The morning was clear, the water reflecting a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at it. I placed the box beside me, its presence both comforting and challenging. Catherine's revelation about her own marriage had surprised me. She had always seemed so self-assured, so certain in her life choices. Learning that she too had faced a pivotal moment of potential dissolution humanized her in a way that made her guidance even more meaningful. But was Elaine's transformation comparable to what Catherine had experienced with her husband? Was it deep enough, genuine enough to build upon? The evidence suggested it was. Elaine had not only met the conditions set forth in the will, but had embraced them with unexpected dedication. Her career had flourished not through shortcuts, but through consistent effort. Her volunteer work had expanded beyond the minimum requirements, becoming a genuine passion. Most tellingly, the entitlement that had once defined her approach to life had been replaced by a humility that seemed authentic. Rather than calculated, yet doubt lingered. Trust, once broken, leaves fault lines that can be triggered by the smallest tremors. Could I live with that vulnerability? Would I constantly be waiting for the next betrayal, the next moment when money or convenience outweighed commitment? I pulled out my phone and found myself scrolling to photos from before everything had fallen apart. Elaine and me hiking in the Columbia River Gorge, laughing at a friend's wedding, cooking together in our kitchen. The happiness in those images wasn't fabricated. It had been real, even if the foundation had been shakier than I'd understood. Then I swiped to a more recent photo, one taken at the scholarship fundraiser we'd organized 3 months ago. Elaine and I stood on opposite sides of an oversized check, not touching, but united in purpose. Her smile was different in this photo, less carefree perhaps, but deeper, more grounded. My expression too had changed, the easy optimism replaced by something more weathered but also more authentic. We weren't the same people who had married 7 years ago. Perhaps that was the point. I picked up the wooden box and opened it again, removing the velvet pouch. The ring and key rested in my palm, each representing a different path forward. Catherine had framed the choice as one between walking away or rebuilding, but perhaps there was a third option, one that honored both the growth we had experienced and the reality that some things, once broken, take new forms when reassembled. I slipped the items back into the pouch and headed toward my car. I knew what I needed to do next, though the outcome remained uncertain. Whatever happened, I would face it with clear eyes and an open heart, a perspective that felt like Catherine's greatest gift of all. That evening, as the sun began its descent behind Portland's western hills, I sent Elaine a text message. "When you return from Sarah's, we need to talk. Not about the past, but about possibilities. Bring an open mind and honest heart." Her response came quickly. "I'll be there. Whatever you decide, thank you for the grace you've shown me this past year. I didn't deserve it, but it changed everything." I placed my phone on the coffee table and gazed out the window at the gathering dusk. Tomorrow would bring clarity, one way or another. Tonight was for reflection, for honoring the journey that had brought us to this crossroads, and for acknowledging that sometimes the most difficult paths lead to the most meaningful destinations. Catherine had understood that truth. Now it was our turn to discover where it might lead. The day Elaine was scheduled to return from Sarah's, I woke before sunrise. Sleep had been elusive, my mind repeatedly cycling through possibilities, examining each potential future from every angle. By morning, I was no closer to certainty, but I had reached a state of calm acceptance. Whatever happened today would set a course, but the journey would unfold one step at a time. I spent the morning at the Whidbey Island cabin. The drive and very ride had given me time to think, to prepare myself for what lay ahead. The property was everything Catherine's practical yet generous spirit suggested, a modest but well-built structure on a bluff overlooking the water, with windows that captured both sunrise and sunset. Inside was simple, functional, and somehow timeless, like Catherine herself had been. I walked the property line, breathing in the scent of cedar and salt air, allowing the rhythm of waves against the shore to order my thoughts. This place represented possibilities, a retreat, a fresh start, perhaps even a place of reconciliation. Catherine had given me not just property, but options, and the freedom to choose among them. By early afternoon, I was back in Portland, waiting in the living room when I heard Elaine's key in the lock. She entered quietly, setting her overnight bag by the door. She looked nervous but resolute, dressed simply in jeans and a blue sweater that brought out the color of her eyes. The designer, clothes and carefully cultivated image that had once been her armor were long gone. "Hi," she said softly, hovering near the entryway as if uncertain of her welcome. "Thanks for coming," I replied, gesturing toward the sofa. "Would you like some tea? I just made a pot." She nodded, visibly relaxing at this small gesture of hospitality. I poured 2 cups, using the familiar ritual to gather my thoughts. "I went to see Greenberg yesterday," I began, sitting across from her. "Catherine left something else for me, something to be given only after you'd fulfilled all the conditions of the inheritance." Elaine's eyes widened slightly. What was it? A letter and a choice. I placed the wooden box on the coffee table. Between us, she shared something I never knew, that her own marriage had nearly ended once. Her husband made a serious mistake, and she almost left him, but she chose to rebuild instead. "And she was suggesting you do the same?" Elaine asked, her voice carefully neutral. I shook my head. She wasn't prescribing a path. She was sharing her experience while acknowledging that my decision had to be my own. I paused, studying Elaine's face. She also left me property on Whidbey Island, a cabin on the water. It sounds beautiful, Elaine said, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. She couldn't yet see how this connected to our situation, to the conversation we were having. It is. I took a deep breath. Elaine, this past year has been strange, difficult in some ways, illuminating in others. I've watched you change, grow into someone who takes responsibility, who contributes, who builds, rather than consumes. Hope began to dawn in her expression, but I held up a hand. I need to be completely honest with you. The trust that was broken, it can't simply be restored to what it was. That version of our relationship is gone. Her face fell slightly, but she nodded in understanding. I know. I wouldn't expect. I know how badly I hurt you. But, I continued, that doesn't mean something new can't be built. Something different. Perhaps something stronger because it's based on who we are now, not who we were then. Elaine sat very still, as if afraid any movement might shatter this fragile moment. What are you saying, Nathan? I reached for the velvet pouch, opening it, to reveal the ring and key. Catherine left me these as symbols. The ring belonged to her grandmother. Her husband gave it to her when they renewed their vows after their crisis. The key is to the Whidbey Island property. I placed both items on the table between us. I'm not offering either one definitively today. What I'm suggesting is a new beginning. Not picking up where we left off, but starting something different, with clear eyes and honest hearts. I don't understand, Elaine said, though her tone suggested she was beginning to. I'm proposing we date, Elaine, not as husband and wife trying to repair a broken marriage, but as two people who have been through something significant together and emerged, changed. Two people who might want to discover who they are to each other now. Surprise registered on her face, followed by careful consideration. Dating, she repeated, testing the word. Starting over. Not exactly starting over, I clarified. We can't erase our history, and I wouldn't want to. All of it, the good and the bad, has shaped us. I'm suggesting we acknowledge that history while exploring whether there's a future. Elaine reached for her tea, taking a sip as she processed my words. What about the house, the inheritance, the legal aspects of our marriage? We maintain the status quo for now, I suggested. You've earned your inheritance. That's yours. No strings attached. We continue living separately but cordially as we have been. As for the legal aspects, I shrugged. Those can wait until we have clarity about where we're headed. She set down her cup, her expression thoughtful. And if it doesn't work? If we date and discover that too much has changed, or not enough, then we part ways with dignity and respect, knowing we gave it an honest chance. The house gets sold as originally planned. You keep your inheritance, I keep the Whidbey property, and we both move forward with valuable lessons learned. It was a fair question, one that acknowledged the very real possibility that our paths might ultimately diverge, despite our best intentions. Her willingness to face that possibility directly rather than offering empty assurances spoke volumes about how much she had grown. And if it does work, she asked quietly. What then? I gestured toward the ring. Then maybe someday that becomes relevant again. Not as a restoration of what was, but as a symbol of something new we've built together. Elaine was quiet for a long moment, her gaze shifting between the ring, the key, and my face. When she finally spoke, her voice held a certainty I hadn't heard in years. I would like that very much, Nathan. To discover who we might be to each. Other now, no expectations, no guarantees, just possibilities. Relief and something like hope washed through me. Not the naive optimism of our early days, but something more tempered and true. I was thinking we could start with dinner. Tomorrow night. A real date, not just eating at opposite ends of the table. A smile bloomed across her face, genuine, unguarded. I'd like that. And maybe next weekend, if things go well, a trip to Whidbey Island, to see the property, to spend some time in neutral territory. One step at a time, she agreed, her expression softening. We talked for hours after that, more openly than we had in years. Not about the past, there would be time for that later when wounds had healed further, but about who we had become during our strange year of living separately together. About the scholarship fund and its future, about her work and mine, about books we'd read and thoughts we'd had. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. There were no declarations of undying love, no passionate embraces. But there was something perhaps more valuable, authentic connection between two people who had seen each other at their worst and were cautiously discovering their best. As evening fell, casting long shadows across the living room, Elaine gestured toward the items still resting on the coffee table. Would you like me to put those away for you? I shook my head, gathering them carefully and returning them to the wooden box. Not yet. Let's keep them here, visible but not pressing. A reminder of possibilities, not obligations. She nodded in understanding, then glanced at her watch. It's getting late. I should probably head up. Good night, Elaine, I said simply. Good night, Nathan, she replied, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. And thank you for the chance to discover who we might be. After she had gone upstairs, I sat alone in the quiet living room, the wooden box open before me. Catherine's final gift hadn't been the property or the ring. It had been perspective. The understanding that endings can become beginnings, that growth is possible even from the deepest wounds, and that the most meaningful paths are often the ones we forge ourselves rather than follow from others' maps. I closed the box gently, knowing its contents would remain important no matter where this new journey led. Tomorrow would bring a first date with a woman I had known for years, yet was just beginning to truly see. The prospect was both terrifying and exhilarating, much like life itself, when lived with authenticity and courage. Outside, stars emerged, one by one in the darkening sky. Inside, a quiet certainty settled over me. Whatever happened next, whether Elaine and I found our way back to each other or discovered we were meant for different paths, I was grateful for the journey that had brought me here, to this moment of clear-eyed possibility. Catherine would have approved, I thought, not of any particular outcome, but of the honest process of discovery, of the courage to face difficult truths and the wisdom to recognize that sometimes the most valuable inheritances aren't measured in dollars, but in the lessons they teach us about what truly matters. As I finally headed upstairs to my room, I felt Catherine's presence, not as a ghost or mystical force, but as the enduring impact of a life well lived. Her final orchestration hadn't been about controlling our choices from beyond the grave. It had been about creating conditions where genuine choice became possible. That perhaps was her greatest gift of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.